In his book on painting, Alberti declares that the point of painting is to tell a story. He uses the Italian word "istoria", which can be translated into English as history or story or storytelling. For Alberti, it is the most meaningful part of a painting. Now, this idea isn't entirely new. We've already seen Italian artists dedicating themselves to visual storytelling. Giotto is the best example. Historian Svetlana Alpers famously distinguished painting in the north from that of Italy by differentiating the northern emphasis on description of objects and appearances from the Italian concern for narrative, for telling a story. So a northern artist like Van Eyck studies meticulously materials, textures, surfaces in incredible detail, whereas an Italian artist focuses on gestures, motions, actions and interactions to involve us in a scene where something is happening. What Alberti did was to explain this narrative emphasis more concretely and to articulate why it mattered so much. According to Alberti, the purpose of an artwork in telling a story is to move the soul of the beholder. This is a major insight. Artworks exist to do something to a viewer. Never forget that. It is the most important thing to know and to ask. What is this artwork wanting to do to a viewer? Who is the viewer it implies? So Alberti explains that an Historia will move the soul of the artist when it shows the movements of the souls of the figures. The Historia will move the soul of the beholder when each man or woman painted there clearly shows the movement of their own soul. This is a tall order for an artist if you think about it. Alberti is basically saying that an artist like Masaccio here, that what Masaccio needs to do is to paint, or for a sculptor to sculpt, a soul, and how souls respond to a world. Well, how do you do that? With colored dirt, which is what paint is, or bronze or stone. According to Alberti, it's all about movement. All the bodies in the painting or a sculpture ought to move according to what is ordered in the Historia. Their movements ought to reflect what's happening, what's unfolding in the story. He goes on to say, as an example of a movement that's telling us the story, in an Historia, I like to see someone who admonishes and points out to us what is happening here, or beckons with his hand to see, or menaces with an angry face and flashing eyes. He actually wants there to be a figure in the painting who seems to call to us to participate, to interact, to be part of the significance of what's happening, which is what the Virgin Mary is doing here. And if we could see this painting in person, since it's huge, we could see that her eyes are flashing. To get a better sense of what Alberti means by movements of the soul, let's look at another painting by Masaccio. This one. It's in the Brancacci Chapel, which is a small chapel, a family's dedicated prayer chapel, the Brancacci family's chapel, within a larger church, the Church of Santa Maria del Carmine. And this chapel is filled with multiple painted panels telling significant stories from the Bible. At the entrance are two linked panels, a pair across the entrance, that deal with the story of Adam and Eve, one showing them in paradise, the other that showing them being cast out after they have sinned. The interesting thing is that the one in paradise showing them about to eat the forbidden fruit, is by an artist named Masolino, and the other is by Masaccio. And this question here is directed toward Alberti's ideas, because if we're talking about Historia, it's pretty clear that Masaccio is involving us in the drama much more, because he is showing us the movements of their soul. And how is he doing that? Well, here's the visual evidence. He's doing exactly what Alberti said. He's showing us the movements of the body as expressing their inner state. To express is to bringing out into our view what's happening inside in their souls. So we see Eve covering her breasts, covering her genitals, as if we see her feeling shame, and we see her throwing her head back with her eyes furrowed together in anguish, a kind of disbelief and anguish. We see Adam lowering his head, throwing his head into his hands, covering his face. Again, we sense that he is aware in shame and regret of what he has done. And this is so different than the kind of Barbie and Ken mannequin dolls that Masolino has, which barely move. They're so stiff, and those movements tell us very little about any kind of inner soul. And so we don't feel the consequence, the significance of the Istoria in the way that Masaccio makes us feel it. Comparing on the left another painting by Masaccio in the Brancacci Chapel to the same or almost the same subject by Giotto, baptism. Here, Jesus is being baptized by John the Baptist. Here we have people, not Jesus, ordinary people becoming Christian, being baptized. Again, we have a narrative where the meaning of the narrative, the reason we care, is because we connect to the bodies that we see, which are so incredibly physical, with the sternum bones, the collarbones, the muscles, and not just physical in terms of the anatomy, but in terms of the fact that we can tell this guy is really cold and has goosebumps, and we can see his face, but we understand, again, the movements of the soul, that he's willing to be cold and to shiver almost naked because of the consequence of the act of baptism as for him, the salvation of his soul.